The gecko's body began to release an intense frozen kai, repelling Soryong. Our boy panicked, realizing that it was pissed off. The gecko jumped, and upon noticing this, Huyen stood in front of our boy and with a worried gaze asked him to be careful. Without hesitating for a second, she pushed Soryong. At that moment, the fierce gecko descended forcefully to the ground. But luckily, Huyen and Soryong were barely saved. Soryong hugged the injured gecko tightly and fell backwards onto the ground. The attention of the other gecko fixed on them and it started roaring again. The gecko's eyes began to shine with rage. Soryong extended his hand toward it and with an expression full of fear asked it to wait a moment. With a serious gaze, Soryong admitted that this was not what it seemed, asking the creature to calm down. Just then, Soryong's eyes widened in confusion. The female gecko that Soryong was holding in his arms began to make sounds, leaving our boy somewhat confused. With eyes shining with fury, the gecko prepared to attack. But then, it calmed down and felt somewhat surprised. The two geckos began to talk to each other and couldn't help but laugh. Soryong's attention was fixed on them, making his jaw drop. At that moment, Peng Muin and his men returned to the cave and with a worried gaze, the leader asked if Soryong was okay. Gripping his sword tightly, Peng Muin admitted that the gecko was vicious and fast. He didn't expect it to slip between his legs. Upon seeing Peng Muin's sword, the gecko clenched its teeth and began to roar. Just before things could heat up, Soryong stepped in the middle, raised his hand and with a serious expression asked Peng Muin to wait a second. With a confident smile he told Peng Muin that he was fine and asked him to step back a little since he was going to try talking to him for a moment. Peng Muin's eyes filled with confusion as he didn't know if Soryong wanted to try talking to the gecko. He asked if our boy thought the gecko could understand words. Looking at the gecko, with a confident expression he said that the gecko seemed to understand speech up to a certain point and it was likely that it wouldn't attack them again. He asked if Huyen could bring some dry grass. With a confused gaze, she nodded her head. With a cheerful smile, she and the centipede began to collect the dry grass that was near the rocks. A while later, she prepared a soft nest of dry grass for the female gecko. Soryong and Huyen sat next to the female gecko, and our boy asked the male gecko not to worry since he was not trying to hurt her, explaining that he had removed the shell that would not come off and had taken away what was covering her eyes, asking him to make sure to keep licking her eyes for a while. The gecko approached her and with a curious gaze began to lick her eyes. Soryong crossed his arms and revealed that only one problem remained. Upon hearing this, the attention of both the gecko and Huyen focused on Soryong. Touching his head, Soryong began to observe her tail and revealed that her eyes should heal well. But the problem was her tail. Half of it was already rotting and he didn't believe that licking it would help. The gecko began to look at her tail and couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. He turned towards Soryong and nodded with his head, saying that he was right. Forming scissors with his fingers, Soryong revealed that they would have to cut the tail. The gecko's face filled with sweat and fear when he imagined Soryong cutting her tail. The creature began to roar again. Upon seeing this, our boy felt somewhat confused. The gecko jumped and with glowing eyes prepared to attack. Soryong put his arms in front of his chest and with a gaze full of fear, began to scream. A few hours later, Peng Muin's men lit a campfire inside the cave, while Soryong and Huyen were sitting on the rocks. Using her finger, Huyen began to apply a special balm on Soryong's cheek. Our boy let out a sigh and felt furious, since he was only trying to help but even so the gecko had bitten him. Huyen, who was applying the balm on his wound, asked him to stay still, explaining that if he moved it could leave a scar. Peng Muin, who had his arms crossed, began to laugh, saying that Soryong was finally starting to act like a real man since after all, he had gotten a glorious scar in battle. Upon hearing this, Huyen began to stare at Peng Muin with a sinister gaze. Feeling her gaze, the patriarch could not help but feel fear. Touching his cheek, Soryong felt relieved since the misunderstanding had somehow been cleared up. The small centipedes climbed onto Huyen's body and began to play. Seeing how the centipedes were not reacting to any murderous intent, he realized that little gecko never intended to harm him in the first place. While they were distracted, Gupi appeared and called their attention. Upon hearing his voice, Soryong's and Huyen's attention turned to Gupi. Gupi appeared alongside the gecko, revealing that the creature had something to say. With a forced smile, Soryong began to touch his cheek and asked if he was ready. The gecko nodded. Soryong stood up, promising to do his best effort. But before that, he wanted to ask something to the gecko. He began to observe our boy and became somewhat curious. Showing a finger, Soryong asked what geckos ate, since if he was going to cut her tail off, she was going to need to eat something nutritious in order to recover well. Taking small jumps, the gecko turned his back on them and began to move away. Soryong panicked and started to follow him. The little gecko moved several meters away and stopped near a small plant. Soryong's eyes filled with curiosity and his attention focused on the plant. Using his mouth, the gecko pulled out the plant and began to show it to Soryong. Our boy took the small plant in his hand. Peng Muin and Huyen began to observe it closely. With a curious gaze, she asked if she could take a quick look at the plant. Our boy did not refuse and handed her the plant. Huyen took the plant and began to inspect it carefully. Showing the plant to Soryong, she revealed that although it was weak, she could feel a bit of kai seeping out. She was sure that this was a seed of a spirit herb that used to grow in this cavern. Soryong's eyes widened in confusion. He took the seed and his jaw dropped in surprise. With a serious gaze, Peng Muin revealed that he had heard about it long ago. It was said that spirit herbs always grew where spiritual beasts dwelled. The centipedes were sleeping on top of the rocks. Huyen began to observe them and explained that if that was the case, then maybe these little ones, just like the centipedes, survived by feeding on the kai of the spirit herbs. Soryong clenched his fist and his jaw dropped, realizing that if they unearthed the spirit herb, then that meant they were in serious trouble. He panicked and started to replant the herb again, but Peng Muin mentioned that it was no longer useful. Soryong planted the herb again, but Peng Muin placed his hand on his shoulder and revealed that once a spirit herb had been touched by human hands, it would not grow again. He was sure that the gecko knew this and for that reason had unearthed it to show them. Even if he replanted it, it was not going to grow beyond this point, leaving our boy in shock. Soryong began to imagine Jughu pulling out the spirit herbs that were in the cave, and the little geckos crying. Soryong's eyes filled with tears knowing that humans were very cruel. With a curious gaze, Peng Muin asked Gu Pi what the name of the spirit herb that used to grow here was. Gu Pi began to observe him in silence, and revealed that that thing was called frost ginseng. Peng Muin began to ponder, and then a smile appeared on his face since then all they had to do was find something that emitted the same type of kai as the frost ginseng. Upon hearing this, our boy stood up and his eyes began to shine with joy. He asked if there really was something like that. With a smile, Peng Muin nodded his head and then revealed that it was called ice jade, just like the frost ginseng. It contained the essence of cold kai. Touching his chin, he mentioned that the problem was how to obtain the ice jade, since even with money, it was not something that could be obtained easily. While they were distracted, Huyen stepped forward, capturing their attention. With a serious gaze, she said that if they were talking about the ice jade, then she knew someone who had it. Upon hearing this, a curious smile appeared on the faces of Soryong and Peng Muin since for them this was good news. With a curious gaze, Soryong approached her and asked who had the ice jade. She panicked and asked him to calm down. She began to sweat not knowing what to say. Seeing this, Soryong and Peng Muin became somewhat confused. Huyen swallowed saliva, then began to touch her chin and with a sincere gaze revealed that they were some other weed. Upon hearing this, our boy's jaw dropped in surprise, while on the other hand, Peng Muin became even more confused. With a serious gaze, she let out a sigh. Soryong's eyes widened in fear as he did not know what was happening. So, friends, this chapter comes to an end. What will happen next? We'll uncover it in the next chapter. Don't forget to rate this chapter out of 10 in the comments. We'll see you in the next video. Until then, take care and goodbye. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel.